Morning, Rob. How are you doing?
Not bad, not bad at all. How's things your end?
All good, thanks, Rob. Looking forward to a really exciting episode on something we are definitely very passionate about, and I'm hoping our listeners take a lot from this because, for many reasons, the topic of that we're covering today is growth mindset, and it's helped myself and I think you too improve drastically over the last 3 or 4 years. Particularly as we've applied it in organizations and we've adopted a lot of growth mindset principles ourselves.
Yeah, I think, when we talk about mindsets, I think it really makes me reflect on the term that's been quite ubiquitous or quite popular during the pandemic, and it really frames how certain people can face the same challenge in different ways. And it really comes down to mindset.
Definitely. So before we get underway, how have you been over the last week and what's been happening in your world?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's been good, hey. I think I've been a lot more intentional of self-care. Really, that care of self is the new wealth. Has really been a big metric I've been living with, and I've been really acknowledging. I think often I used to sort of almost have a bulletproof mindset in that I wouldn't prioritize leave. I wouldn't really book things like a massage or a de-stress weekend intentionally. I would kind of do it if I had a special, but now I'm a lot more intentional about that for that care of self. I think that's definitely something I've been uh, working on. What's been top of mind for you lately?
I think much of the same. I think we've obviously got the Easter holidays that are fast approaching and a number of public holidays which have made for longer weekends. But just trying to, after the crazy start to this year where, we've been working 50, 60-hour weeks, is trying to really manage, as you say, the burnout and fatigue that to some extent has played out where, I've been getting to weekends and on a Friday just thinking, oh, I can't wait to do absolutely nothing and just sleep and rest. But that's not necessarily likely to happen when you've got a 3.5-year-old boy who demands a lot from you as a parent on the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, just I often feel sorry for myself sometimes balancing my schedule, but I don't have a kid yet, so my really hats off to you. But I really don't know how you do it. Um, yeah, and I think just out of interest, what's been also a really interesting thing I've been reflecting on is people often say to replenish or recharge, I go watch series or something, right? We take a break from the medium screen to go to our big screen, but at the same time we're watching our small screen the whole time, right, on our cell phones. And that's been an interesting thing that I've flipped up actually, is I've gone from just watching series or a movie as a break because I'm never really fully detached. I'm always on my screen answering emails, like supposed to be switching off. But I've been engaging with reading more, going for walks, actually doing a puzzle, doing stuff that doesn't just mindlessly numb the brain, but engage the brain in different ways. I think that's actually been a cool thing I've been working with.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think those things are so key in relation to being our best selves and being able to, as we talk about, perform optimally in our previous episode in the things that are important to us.
Mm.
But I think let's get into our topic today, which is around mindset and how our mindset is such a critical role to play in the beliefs that we hold, the lens with which we see the world, and the actions that we take and the behaviors that we display. We've been fortunate enough within our business that we work in, which is through applied neuroscience and people and leadership development, to work quite closely with the work of Carol Dweck. And I think, Carol Dweck is almost the mother figure around growth mindset and has done research around growth mindset from early child development all the way through to its application in an organizational context. And we've tried to adopt, as we said earlier, a lot of those behaviors ourselves. And I think we've seen rich return in relation to how we overcome challenges, how we see change differently, and how we reframe change, particularly change we've dealt with in COVID, to help us grow, learn, and improve.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting the actual term growth mindset has really become popular last year. First of all, just talking about mindsets in general, as you've said, it's the lens you use to make sense of yourself and the world. It's almost like the pair of glasses. Are you wearing rose tinted sunglasses or clear spectacles? It's the lens, right, that you interpret the world and yourself. And in particular, growth mindset from the work of Dr. Carol Dweck has become really popular. A lot of our clients in the African corporate space are doubling down on it because they see the value in resilience, in change agility. But with any term that becomes very popular, it's also bound to be misinterpreted as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the power of mindset is something I wish everyone could start to be conscious of and acknowledge, because if you have a mindset which is around growth, around improvement, around learning from failings, around seeing change as an opportunity rather than a threat to your existence, it really does transform your thinking in many, many facets, and its application is broad, not just in the business context, in your personal life, anything you're passionate about. If you play a musical instrument, if you are passionate about sport, in the way that you raise your children, it has a multitude of applications which are really beneficial. But I think
Yeah.
let's talk about mind. Yeah.
Sorry, Rob, I just want to jump in there before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of the mindset, because I gotta jump in before we get taken off on the journey, because I know we'll talk forever. Is a growth mindset is also a big part of why we're doing this, what the learning zone is about. Because as we'll learn, as we unpack and pull apart some of the components of it, the learning zone is about creating a place to make mistakes, experiment, and learn. And it's something that we don't do enough. We overemphasize the performance zone, where mistakes are minimized and performance is golden and is the goal. The learning zone is around experimenting, making mistakes, and focusing on learning. And growth mindset is really one of the superpowers that unlocks that element of the learning zone. So I just wanted to pepper it in there as well.
No, I think that's such a great point to make mention of, Robin. I was about to go full steam ahead, as you noticed there, and almost cut you off. But sorry, buddy.
Take off.
I think
Take off.
that's very key. Yeah, take off, because, as you know, you might need to cut me short because I get really passionate about this topic, mainly because of the impact it's had on me as an individual. But I think let's talk about, mindset in relation to change, because many of the listeners that are listening to this actual podcast today may have felt a little bit overwhelmed and concerned with what happened during COVID and the amount of change that they were having to deal with, and in many instances was just thrust upon them, within the businesses that they were working in, expected to do things differently, to work virtually, to become accustomed to using technology in different ways, how they were collaborating with teams. There was so many levels of change required within what people were doing. But I think let's talk about what the research shows in relation to mindset within individuals, and what happens with the way people see change from a mindset standpoint within the brain. Rob, you know a lot about this, but I've always found it fascinating through the research that's been conducted that, endocrinologists who study the hormonal responses in the brain and the biological response to change have uncovered a lot, that individuals who see change as an opportunity to learn, grow, and improve actually have a big dump of oxygenation. And it's basically your body's priming itself to get ready for the change, and to be your best version of how you go about overcoming whatever it is that you'll face, whether it's adversity, whether it's failure, whether it's things you haven't done so well, and to get infinitely better through that change, and through that oxygenation. Endocrinologists call it eustress, which is the good stress within your body and within your brain, which means that your brain is ultimately primed to, be more collaborative, to be more reflexive in relation to how it acknowledges learnings of the past and its application in the future. It's able to detect errors more effectively. It's able to generate insights in relation to problems that it's dealing with. Whereas those individuals who see change as a threat and are little bit concerned around how they'll show up in the change, that they could be exposed, that they could be made vulnerable in relation to how they go about the change and how they perform in relation to their colleagues or peers, we see what endocrinologists call de-stress. It's the bad stress, that flight or flight response in relation to it. And then your brain and your body is actually hampered in relation to what it's doing in that change. And I find that very, very fascinating, because I had a lot of those distress type responses to the change I was dealing with during COVID. It'd be interesting to hear some of your examples, Rob, and your learnings with that being said.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, because it really comes into, you know, some of the other episodes we've been talking about around understanding what happens in the brain. And the first part is to understand that the brain is designed to keep us safe. And when we experience changes of threats, our brain goes into the fight or flight mode. But when we experience change as an opportunity, grow, with regards to growth mindset, the brain doesn't just tolerate the change. It's very different. It doesn't just take the change away. What it does is it reframes the change, and you actually perform better as a result. Your blood vessels don't constrict, and you don't get more stress hormones and cortisol. Your blood vessels actually dilate, and more oxygen flows throughout your body. So you actually don't even enter a state of, I'm either very stressed or I'm tolerating. I'm either very stressed or I'm thriving, I'm performing. And that's the real benefit with a growth mindset. I think one really big thing that's important for me, and then I think that also played out during you know, the amount of change that we've had to you know, endure over the last year, and it has been enduring, is the real difference between proving and improving. Whenever we faced this challenge of now suddenly becoming completely virtual, for a lot of us, we work a lot with our international clients virtually completely, but now people still preferred face to face, particularly when you were in the same city. But now the only way to meet was virtual. We always thought it has to be perfect, and it was very stressful. I mean, getting on a Zoom call, trying to be slick, you know, am I mute? I'm on mute. The bloody quote of 2020, right? I'm always on mute, and you get frustrated. At least for me, I find myself so frustrated, where, you know, I'm trying to show up in a good way. I'm trying to, you know, maintain relationships, engage in a way that seems slick and professional, and my bloody camera won't work that day. Murphy's Law, right? Or my computer would take 10 minutes to boot up, you know, and MS Teams as an application is always updating and iterations and never stable. And I found myself very stressed, from a cortisol perspective, a hormone perspective, particularly when things happened in a social setting. And just with the technology, that was always the one. Like, I'm thinking, do people think we look good? Are we seeming slick right now? Is my lighting great? And that for me was definitely some great examples of going to that prove mindset.
Yeah, and I think that's such a key piece to acknowledge too, is, you know, many individuals within this crazy world we've worked in and lived through, is that they want to show up as the best version of themselves time and time again, and are wanting to be perfect in every single facet. And I think, you know, we've all had to overcome loads of different challenges and had to learn, you know, at rates that we're not accustomed to. But, you know, that's a key part of mindset is, and many leaders I think struggled with, is having to be vulnerable. You know, when they came on to Zoom calls or MS Teams calls and had children shouting in the background, and, you know, people walking in and out of picture with their wives asking them questions around who's collecting the kids today, and, you know, what time should I start dinner, is there was a level of vulnerability in relation to how they showed up. And I think that's one of the key differentiators of some of the good leaders versus those who are exceptional, is they're able to acknowledge that they too are not perfect, that they are in a state of trying to navigate this change and show up in ways that show that they are better day in and day out over time, but not the finished article or product right now. And I think that's one thing that many people learn during this time is, you know, adopt a growth mindset, and not trying to prove yourself all the time, but rather how are you showing your team that you are also trying to learn and improve, and not trying to demonstrate how great you are and how much expertise and deep-rooted knowledge you have, but how are you developing in the way that you engage?
Yeah, and I think if we take a step back, just to really define the difference between the two mindsets, it's really to say, or really to reflect on the question, do you believe your abilities can grow and develop? If you do believe that, you have a growth mindset. If you believe that you're born with what you got and you can't grow and develop, then you have a fixed mindset. And based on the differentiation of that mindset, you approach tasks very differently. For example, with myself, in that example of trying to be perfect the whole time and minimize mistakes, and where's the button, and I'm looking too close to the camera, or whatever the thing is, and the mute button, that was really reinforcing the fact that my ability is what it is, and I've got to show up and I've got to be perfect. A growth mindset approached that differently, to say, I can grow and develop. This is an opportunity to practice, to identify and become a bit more slick in the way that I do it. And that's also another big link to the whole basis of the learning zone, is that we don't do enough of that in the learning zone. We'd always jump on a call and then assume we're going to figure things out and be perfect. One of my learnings was that, I got really frustrated in that I wasn't as slick as I would want to be on the virtual platforms in the beginning, because I wanted to add all the sophistication, all the fancy tools. But how often did I create a learning zone to just jump on an internal call and say, hey guys, I want to try out this cool thing with the polling software and some new add-ons, as an internal call. Let's just experiment and do that, right? And I think that talks to some of the habits and behaviors that sit under this, around how do you go from proving to improving? How do you experiment? And also, as a leader, how do you create the safe space that people feel it's okay to experiment as well? And I know you have lots of great examples that you've been working with in that space with some of the clients as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a key piece to make mention of, Rob. And I think also when we differentiate between growth and fixed mindset, is they play a critical role in that. Sometimes a fixed mindset isn't necessarily wrong, but we need to be conscious of it as individuals, of catching ourselves when a fixed mindset doesn't serve you, and how you can shift to a growth mindset to get infinitely better. And I think the major differentiation between the two, and something that we speak about, to our clients and broadly in business, is a growth mindset. What differs it from a fixed mindset is a growth mindset is much more of an intrinsic view around how am I becoming the best version of myself and improving who I am today than who I was yesterday, versus a fixed mindset who's continually trying to be better than everyone else around them. It's much more of an extrinsic view. They're continually looking around in their social context or the environment and going, that person's really, really good, and I need to outdo them now. So they try and show up in a way which often can be obstructive and not in the best way that they can do. So, we need to be conscious of that. And if within the teams we work within, our social context, our family and our friends, and even in the organizations that we're employees of, how are we trying to daily get incrementally better, make that 1% improvement in ourselves, rather than in trying to be better than others around us? Because no two people are the same. No two people have the same brains, and no two people have the same experiences or same background. So it's futile and is no good to you in trying to outperform everyone all the time, but rather looking intrinsically around what you can do to get better.
Yeah, and I think what you just said there really highlights two questions that I was researching, and I read in a study that was so provocative in unpacking some of these dynamics that we're talking about here. And I'd encourage the people that are watching or listening in now just to reflect on the answers to these two questions. And it's a yes or no answer to the question, right? So question number one, do you like to improve yourself? Yes or no?
Definitely.
There you go.
I can definitely say yes. I would love to improve. I think I've got a lot of improvements to make.
That's part of this podcast. Question two is, do you like feedback? And now for a lot of people,
I would say to you, Rob, sometimes openly, I love feedback. I'm open to feedback. But I'll tell you one thing, that when I'm given critical or harsh feedback, I'm the first one to try and pick it apart or really scrutinize the basis for that feedback rather than listen to it, take what I can from it and look where there is relevancy or validity in what's being said.
Yeah, and there's a big piece there that links again into this journey we've been unpacking, just bits of the brain and some of the discoveries that we know is that we're inherently wired to be social. So when we get that feedback, you want to pick it apart to often prove yourself, right? To justify, because now feedback is interpreted in the brain as someone doesn't think I'm that good, and I'm now in the out group. And that's how our brains our brains default is. And another another great example was that story I was telling you last week around me doing yoga. And I thought it was such a beautiful example and story that really identified this fixed and growth mindset and what would happen, right? So, you know, almost a year and a half ago, I went to a huge cricket stadium for International Yoga Day with my partner. She's a yoga instructor. So I kind of got dragged along. I don't do a lot of yoga as much as I'd like to, but I kind of got dragged along. So imagine this yoga stadium, cricket stadium full of yoga people. You got 500 people on the pitch. Obviously, no cricket happening at that time. It was at the stadium down the road here,
Rob,
Wanderers.
that must have been an interesting sight with the size of those thick quads from your rugby days, eh? You doing yoga
It
in a cricket
was. It
stadium.
was.
It's I'm trying to imagine it, but run me through it. I'm keen to hear more.
Yeah, I didn't. You'll be surprised to know I didn't wear leggings. I actually wore rugby shorts and a Liverpool football jersey. So,
Beautiful,
out of
nice
the
combination.
500, yeah, out of the 500 people that went there for International Yoga Day, I fit in like a glove, I'd say. Uh, and so what eventually happens throughout the day? There's actually a major yoga practice in the stadium. So 500 people on mats. I brought a gym towel, obviously, and this guy's a big microphone and he says, okay, right, everyone now go into a pose. Now you've got old grannies, yoga instructors, young kids. And he says, go to this next pose. And now, if you want to take it a bit further, you can stretch your left leg out. So what do I do? Well, I look to the left and right of me. I see the old grannies. Are they doing it? Are the yoga instructors doing it? What are the kids doing? Because I'm like, how good can I be? And then what was so amazing is the yoga instructor says, now, if you're a young kid, go ahead and stretch and fall over and have fun. And if you're an old person, look to the person next to you and compare yourself really intensely. And that's exactly what I was doing. It was so amazing. When the kids were given the opportunity, they said, hey guys, if you want to, go stretch yourself, go a bit deeper, and you might fall over, but do a cartwheel, have fun. They all did it. They had fun, they stretched, they fell over. But me, as an older person, I don't think I'm that old yet. I was comparing myself. I was looking at that person, I think even sucking in my gut, to be honest. I was thinking, I'm not going to stretch. Geez, no, this is old. There's this older lady here that's much better than me. There's this other person. And it was so amazing for me because it seems if you look at kids, right, they're not afraid to make mistakes, not all of them. And at least in the beginning, before the world told you who to be, you were open to that, to run around and bump your head, both literally and figuratively. And
Yeah.
what happened to us in our lives that we got so caught up in this fixed mindset of proving ourselves? And maybe it comes from our society, right? Getting into high school, into university, into jobs, into job interviews, performance reviews. It's all about proving ourselves, justification, at the expense of focusing on improvement, focusing on areas where we can grow and develop.
I think, Rob, that's such a great story. As adults, and particularly in adulthood, we see it in so many instances now. You watch. I was guilty of that, and I still am conscious of how am I showing up on maybe social media platforms within my social context and group of friends. Is I often catch myself now going, well, why am I trying to, in this discussion, trying to share how much I know or trying to layer into the conversation my learning and try and maybe outdo or show that I am at a level playing field within my social sphere or on social media, trying to assess how many likes I got on a picture. And why is that important? Because in actual fact, it's just our social brain trying to feel like it's valued, it's respected. We're part of an in group, and that in group enables us to have access to so many different things. But if we could just focus intently on being the best version ourselves in every single instance and not care about what other people think, but rather focus intently on our developmental journey, it's so liberating. I cannot tell you how liberating it's been for me to stop worrying about what other people think and just focus intently on my daily journey of getting that much better in the things that are important to me, not what's important to others. And I think if our listeners could take that as a key piece, I think that is where you can really, really unlock your potential and learn, grow, and improve at the pace of change, which we've said all along. And I think that's key. But maybe, Rob, you should share a little bit as we kind of go into the practices, like what are some of the tools people can start to adopt, which are reflective of a growth mindset and help people get that much better?
And I think that's really at the heart of the challenge, because I think the first part is to realize that your default mindset is often a fixed mindset. And that's that mindset where you're not focusing on improving, you're focusing on proving. You're not focusing on developing skill, you're focusing on displaying skill. And you're not comparing yourself over time with progress, you're comparing yourself to others. So it's often to realize that, that's often our default, that's often how we view the world. And it's detrimental when the wheels fall off, when we're faced with unprecedented change. And part of what we can do to start shifting us towards a growth mindset, the understanding that you can grow and develop. One of my most favorite ones, and we use it a lot with our corporate clients, is the power of yet. Is literally to say, back then, back to that cricket stadium, and the guy and the commentator with the big microphone says, now if you want to stretch your left leg out, if you want, in my mind I was like, no, I can't do this. What I can, or what I could have done differently, is said, I can't do this yet, but I'm going to try. Yeah. I can't present well virtually yet. I can't take on that leadership role yet. By simply adding the word yet, we're using the power of language to start reframing our habits and behaviors through our mindset, to understand that things are possible. And if anything, our greatest barrier is ourselves and the belief that things aren't. I will give a caveat there that there are certain things, like I'm not going to play for the Springboks. There are some physical limitations, but there are ways that our brain gets in the way. And there are, and one of the biggest ways is understanding the power of the word yet. And I'd encourage people now that are listening in to really reflect on, what is that narrative I'm telling myself? If I add the word yet, how does it shift it? What possibilities are open to possibly experiment with once I've started framing things with that power of yet?
Yeah, I think that's so powerful, Rob. I think languaging is such a key component, not only your internal narrative and the language that you start to build up in your own head, but the language you use explicitly with others, in how you're showing up is, with growth mindset, we focus intently on not setting yourself ceilings, or if you have set a goal and objective and you're relentless in your pursuit of achieving it, what would be past that goal? Because growth mindset is around incremental gain and improvement, that you don't become complacent and you just sit there. Is how do you get better over time? I think another key piece, Rob, over and above languaging is very consciously asking for feedback. How are we, within whatever context we live and work and function in, asking for feedback and displaying some level of vulnerability around, once again, what could I do differently? Or to your team as a leader, or to individuals in your social sphere, what do you think, in the things you've observed in me and in my behavior, I could improve upon? Because feedback is a key component of growing and learning and improving continuously. And often we're not wanting, we don't go and ask for feedback because we're fearful of how we are exposed and what people think of us. And it's not often easy to take. Yeah, but how do we get that much better? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if it's a quote from that movie Coach Carter, or maybe a quote I've heard in my head and just reframed differently. But when you start doing stuff like that, you are unconsciously giving people permission to do the same. If I am asking for feedback, if I'm showing my experiments, if I'm adding the word yet, I'm I'm creating the learning zone for people to do the same. And that's what one of the biggest things with regards to leadership and our influence is you're always sending signals. How are you being intentional to create the right kind of signals for the team?
Yeah. And I think the most empowering thing, just to wrap up, Rob, is that, neuroscience research shows that there are more possible connections in the human brain than there are stars in the galaxy. And I think many of our listeners would have read around the fact that we only use between 10 and 20% of our brain's potential. So that shows how much growth, potential there is in relation to the things you do on a daily basis. And how are you prioritizing the things that are important to you to get infinitely better in those spaces? But I think that's a wrap on today's session and our podcast around growth mindset and mindsets particularly. And once again, thanks for listening. You can catch us on our channels on Apple iTunes and on Spotify. And we hope that this was valuable to you. Over to you, Rob.
Rob, I think we've said it all that we can for today, and I look forward to continuing the conversation on the next episode.